Welcome to It's All About the Questions, where learning to ask the right questions can success. Now, here to help you ask all the right questions is award-winning author and Laura Stewart.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, and welcome to This Questions. It's so great to have you all here, wherever you're listening around the world, whether you're listening to hearing me and my guests on iHeartRadio, WAXE, or whether you've got it on podcast in 61 countries around the world and counting. I'm so grateful for all and for the lovely notes you send, the tweets, the social media posts, the emails, letting me know what you're learning from my guests and how your perspectives are shifting. Because for me, there is nothing better than knowing that this show is making a difference for you and helping you move forward with whatever you're doing in your life. And I'm blessed because I get to meet some amazing, amazing people. My purpose on this show is to bring those people to you so that you also have a chance to experience the incredible mind-shifting content that they have. And today's guest is no different. I met her at the Vero Beach Book Center a little over a week ago when she was presenting her new book, The 5 Gifts, Discovering Hope, Healing, and Strength When Disaster Strikes. And I've been trying to figure out how to introduce Dr. Laurie Nadel on the show, and it's almost impossible. So what I'm going to do is Laurie, welcome to the show, first off, because your book is so transformative and helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. Thank you so much.
It's really an honor to have you on because the work you're doing has become even more critical. So I want to dive right in and a little background. You're a former award-winning, you're a former journalist, you're a doctor who deals with critical incident stress management. You've worked with 9/11 survivors. You're working with Parkland. You've covered helped some of the most horrible situations that we've seen in the world today. And that's a calling if I've ever heard one.
Yes, it is a calling. It's people say like, what caused you? How did you get into this work? And I say kind of the work kind of called me. I was a news writer and producer for 20 years. And what happened from time to time, and I think it happened to all of us, although people didn't talk about it. They start to have nightmares about the footage that you'd watch every day, like 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, that was carried in, flown in the era before so many satellites. Occasionally, you'd have satellite feeds, and there were always you were always looking at images of mayhem and destruction, and you had to be very clinical about it. But there were a couple of moments that I had where I started to really be concerned about a mother, holding her baby, sitting in the pile of rubble that was once her home because of an earthquake or a bomb or a flash flood or something else. Or I would see thousands of people running down the road of trying to get away from lava, for example, a little bit about what's happening in Hawaii, but in other parts of the world like Indonesia, where people don't have early warning systems. And I started to really ask myself, what happens to these people? And I'm sure that they must need some kind of care or support. So when I changed careers in the late 80s, early 90s, I went back to school to study psychology. And I decided that I would specialize in trauma and stress and how stress affects our health. And specifically what we now call post-traumatic stress and acute stress. And acute stress is what happens in the first 3 months after an event like the Parkland shooting or the Hawaii volcano, if it's something that affects your home and your life directly.
What I struggled with the book was, how do we get it in the hands of everybody that needs to read it? Because for my listeners know, and a little bit about this, that my mom passed away 6 months ago. I've been through a lot of trauma in my life, not Parkland-like trauma, but a lot of things have happened to me that I flash back to car accidents, walking across the street, getting hit by a car, a lot of things like that. But yet, and you have as well, you managed, though, to take a horrible incident that happened to you. You lived through Hurricane Sandy. You were barricaded up in your crawl space of an attic, and you discovered these 5 gifts, a way to help pretty much anyone go through all of the processes that you need to come out the other side of a trauma feeling a bit more balanced. Is that a good way to describe it?
That's a beautiful way to describe it. Thank you.
So there's so much, the other part that was hard about this, Laurie, was I have so much I want to ask you. I could cover about 6 hours of show.
Oh. Oh.
So I want to dive in because I want to make sure we can cover some really good content here. You came up with these 5 gifts for discovering hope, healing, and strength during disaster because of your experience during Hurricane Sandy?
Exactly. I hope that I really sincerely hope that of anyone listening, if you've been through a natural disaster, I can only offer you my support and empathy because the recovery period goes on for years afterwards, and the cycle of help only lasts a few months. So in my case, and the case of about 1 million people in the Northeast who lost their homes to Hurricane Sandy, there was you suddenly come up against institutions that you thought were friendly, like like the bank that holds your mortgage or your insurance company, and you find out that they're really not your friends, and they're really not interested in what's best for you. Excuse me. They're only, they create additional hardship because of the lies that are kind of built into the process and harassment, and they lose your paperwork like dozens of times because if you give up, then they don't have to turn over the money. They can keep earning interest on the money that they're holding. And suddenly you find, that from just kind of going along as an average kind of middle-class citizen, that you're fighting for survival. You're fighting for your financial survival. You're fighting to preserve your home. And it was really horrifying. So about 4 months into this process, I received a voicemail from my homeowner's insurance company saying that the bank that held the mortgage, which had seized or confiscated my insurance settlement check and was doling it out in small amounts after certain stages of construction had been inspected. So once we kind of got through that, I thought everything would be fine, but they sent a letter to the insurance company telling them to cancel my insurance because my home had been abandoned. Now, my home had not been abandoned. My home was unlivable, which I left a voicemail, and I said, my home is unlivable. It has no floor, it has no sewage or garbage, it has no water, it has no heat, it has no electricity, it has no walls. But you know that because your company gave me money to fix the house because of Hurricane Sandy. And so I received another voicemail later in the day, and it said, oh, I just checked your file, and I see that you are a Hurricane Sandy house, so I will not cancel your insurance. But by that time, I think I was so stressed out that I must have lost about like probably 2 or 3 years off my life. And, my heart was pounding, and I just felt like, because once they cancel or for some reason the banks, often play this game, they'll claim that you don't have insurance or they never received your certificate of insurance, and then they put you in a high-risk pool, and they work with insurance companies, or they own or they have a stake in insurance companies, and then they will charge you 3 times as much for the same insurance so that they make money off basically their lie that you don't have, or the accusation that you don't have insurance.
So is that how you came up with one of the gifts, which is patience?
Well, I'm very poor at patience, which is why it was so funny. When that happened, I just decided if I was my own client, I would say take 48 hours and just don't do anything related to, the storm, the repair. Don't look at the construction site. Just kind of leave everything, and it'll still be there in 2 days. And turn off the screens and turn off the phone, and just do whatever you need to do to chill and relax. And so I got a massage, and I took a walk, and I napped, and I tried to kind of get my blood pressure down and my heartbeat, to kind of stabilize. And while I was meditating, I heard like my inner voice or an angel voice or a higher voice, so a voice with deeper wisdom than I have in my normal waking life, whispered 5 words to me, which are humility, patience, empathy, forgiveness, and growth. And they repeated it, and humility, patience, empathy, forgiveness, and growth. And after I kind of absorbed those 5 words, I was told to write them down. I said, these are 5 gifts that will help you to recover from this, it will help you to heal, and you will be able to share these gifts with others. And then I saw myself kind of standing in the sun about a year down the road, and I was kind of shown, I was given that vision so that I could understand that this was not going to go on forever, because that was the question that I had posed to my inner world, if you will, or to my guides when I sat down to meditate. Is this going to be my life from now on? Am I going to be trapped in kind of a bureaucratic purgatory, and this construction thing is never going to be over? And there's no. They showed me it would be over, and eventually it was over. So I started, kind of sitting with the 5 gifts, reflecting on them, sharing them, because I was running 2 long-term support groups on the island where I was living, which is just south of New York City, and people really resonated to them, because we would, some people said that, when they got upset, they would just say these 5 words: humility, patience, empathy, forgiveness, and growth.
And I love that, and we're going to end with that for our first commercial break. We'll be right back with more from Dr. Laurie Nadel, speaking about the 5 gifts. Dr. Nadel, Laurie,
yes.
Let's start talking about a couple of the gifts. I know we're not going to have time to cover all of them, and I also want to make sure we cover something in your book called Emotional First Aid to help people right now, right away, as well. Let's start with humility. What in the book, your definition of humility in terms of these 5 gifts was quite different from what most people tend to think of humility. Can you explain it to us and how we can use that gift to calm us under very stressful situations?
Well, I'm curious, how do most people define humility?
Well, they think of it as, it wasn't me, it was somebody else. I don't really have the knowledge or the wisdom, putting yourself down almost, the way a lot of people tend to think of it.
Yeah, so you're describing it as a kind of like a modesty or an inability to take credit for something. That's an aspect, can be an aspect of humility, but I think humility is kind of surrendering to to whatever has happened, and to be able to say, especially when we're talking about disasters, it kind of allows us to detach a little bit and say, this horrible thing that happened to me, it could have happened. Things like this happen to other people. Suffering is part of the human condition. And with humility, we can accept, what the Buddha called the first noble truth, which is that to be human is to suffer. Nobody gets through the human journey without some kind of suffering. That's part of life. It's not all of life, fortunately, but humility takes the edge off that horrible feeling of powerlessness, and it gets us to shift from asking why me to why not me. This happened to me. It happened, what helped me a lot during the aftermath of the hurricane throughout the whole period was from time to time remembering, what's happening to you is happening to hundreds of thousands of people. 1 million people lost their homes, And I would say probably, conservatively, maybe 2/3 to 3/4 are probably having an identical or similar experience to you, some better, some worse. But, that's 500,000 people or 750,000 people. So I would say to myself, remember, it's not personal. It feels personal because it is happening to your life, but it's, whatever has happened is part of the universal experience of suffering that we all have to go through and can learn from as part of this human journey.
All right. So when you're using this first gift of humility, and I love the way you described it, because I started going through a few things in my past history going, oh, if I had applied that, I think I would have bounced back from it a little faster. But instead,
I hear this from people. I hear this from people a lot. It's like, oh, right, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Humility. It helps with that feeling of victimization. And yes, of course, if you're a victim of of an assault. If you're a victim of a crime, if you've been sexually assaulted, it is very personal. But with humility, you can accept that this has happened to other people also, and as horrible as it is, and as treacherous as this person, or people who wounded me are, I'm bleeding, emotionally, or I'm bleeding inside. But, with humility, I can accept that, the suffering that I'm going through it's something that people go through throughout history, have gone through throughout history, and I'm really not alone in this. And I think that that's really, it's kind of the connection that it helps people to connect to some higher power or spirit or God or angel or guide. It has a very calming effect, because then the ego gets out of our way. The ego is going to say, well, why me? And why did this happen to me? And, these things only happen to me, and they never happen to anybody else. And, of course, it's just my luck that this, and all of that kind of self-talk immediately dissolves if we just ask for humility. The humility to accept where we are right now, even if it's not where we want to be. It's humility.
And in the book on page 181, you and I love this part of what you did. Everybody who's listening, if you go to pick up the book, The 5 Gifts, Discovering Hope, Healing, and Strength When Disaster Strikes, at the end of each chapter around the gifts, you have 5 minutes a day to humility. You're constant. We don't have time to go through every single one of them, but your idea of cognitive restructuring. Mm-hmm. Can you go through that? I mean, I read some of these. I am thankful to be alive. I have my health, family, friends, and loved ones. Even though the person I love most in the world is gone and I feel like giving up, I am doing my best to get through the day. That one really resonated to me with my mom having passed. How does somebody begin to do that for themselves? Create a new thinking.
Well, I think you can create a new thinking by saying, even though I'm devastated, I can accept. I can find something beautiful today, and I think I do somewhere in the book. I do have. I think I suggested as an emotional first aid tool somewhere in the book. I call it a news and goods journal, and every day write down something that happens that causes you to smile or makes your heart happy, even if it's just for a moment. And you can keep track of somebody smiled at you, somebody said hello. You noticed, your flowers are coming up, your kid did something funny, you spent the afternoon with your pet. Hello, there are things that happen in the course of life, in the course of our daily life, that will cause us to have even moments of happiness, sometimes more than moments, sometimes minutes or an hour of calm and peace that has absolutely nothing to do with the event. And those kinds of paying attention to those moments will also help us to kind of accept the burden of our suffering with humility and grace. So with the cognitive restructuring, instead of the self-talk that says, I'm so hurt, I'm so wounded, I'll never recover, this is all there is, life is terrible, people are vicious, all of which are statements that are probably have some truth to them in the context of a catastrophic or a tragic event, you begin to focus on something different. And as you begin to focus, you create like a new thought stream, and it's kind of like laying out a new audio track, if you will, that instead of constantly reminding yourself of how badly you're hurting, that you start to focus on other elements, and the way to do that is to create statements that are kind of affirmations or statements that kind of open up to the future by saying today must be the worst day of my life, but tomorrow could be different. I'm not telling people, to create these like Pollyanna affirmation statements that, I'm happy all the time and the sun always shines through me and, God has blessed me in every way, because you're not going to feel that way in the moment. So with cognitive restructuring, you can begin to kind of reposition yourself as kind of standing with one leg, if you will, in a pool of hurt, and the other foot standing on a piece of ground that feels at best, at worst, kind of neutral, and at best joyful. So you're kind of beginning to inch your way mentally, out of the tragic soup that you're going to be it naturally kind of brews in our heads after a catastrophic event.
Perfect. And we're going to go into the national news break right now, which you, having been a journalist, totally understand. We are here with Dr. Laurie Nadel speaking about the 5 gifts. And after the national news, we'll be right back to talk about another one of the 5 gifts and some emotional first aid tips. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. If you're joining us on the podcast, if it was instantaneous, if you're listening to us live on the air, you listened to the national news, and hopefully that did not stress you out too much. If it did, we're here with Dr. Laurie Nadel, and she's going to help us clear through that. So, Laurie, we started talking about humility, one of the 5 gifts. The others are patience, empathy, forgiveness, and growth. And I'd like to jump to growth, which is the last of the 5 gifts, just to talk about it, because the people that I know that lived through 9/11 or lost people through 9/11 or through the tsunamis or volcanoes or whatever it might be, or something as simple as, it's not a massive national tragedy, but maybe they lost all their money or they got hit by a car, one I personally know for myself, or they saw somebody die in front of them that they care about. Growth seems to be so hard for them to wrap their head around. It seems to take forever.
The time people, one of the reasons I wrote this book is because, people who've gone through something, whether it's a car accident or September 11th or Parkland, after 2 to 3 months, the hope cycle stops and the story's no longer on the screen, and, the people aren't coming over, with casseroles or, smoothies or whatever, and you're alone. And you're alone with the pain, and people don't want to hear about it anymore because people don't like to feel helpless. And when they see you hurt or me hurt, and they care about us, they want us to get better. So they start saying, "What's wrong with you? You should be over it right now." And it takes 3 to 5 years really to recover sufficiently so that it's not the first thing that you think about immediately, and it's not in the forefront of your consciousness all the time. And so I think that's really, with growth, you get to this place where you can look back and say, I would never wish it on anybody, and I wish I hadn't gone through it, but I can honestly say that I wouldn't be who I am now. I wouldn't have learned what I've learned, and I wouldn't be who I am now if it wasn't for going through this experience. I wouldn't have the friends that I have. I've made these new connections with people. I wouldn't be as strong as I am. I wouldn't have the humility or the compassion that this has given me to be able to be of support to others. So we can't really make growth happen. We are growing all the time. Our cells are regenerating all the time. I mean, any bioorganism, as long as you're alive, you're going to be growing. And so I think it's important to understand that, of all of the gifts, forgiveness, we need to think of it as forgiving, being in a forgiving state or a forgiving place, because it's not a light switch that goes off and on. And growth is really the experience of growing as a result of having gone through this experience.
Have you seen people when they're going through a crisis and they've started working through the 5 gifts, when they start moving into growth and beginning to think about it, that they get stopped by guilt? They're almost afraid to move forward, that they need to hold it still?
Well, you'll never give it up. I mean, it becomes part of, how you position your view of life. I mean, it's something that changes you forever. And by the time, you get to the stage of growing where you can actually look back at who you were at the time of that event and really experience yourself as somehow different, as stronger, more positive, in the sense that you're not like bent over in pain or not able to sleep or horrified, in shock. The first 3 to 6 months, after an event, we're kind of in shock. And we have to make critical survival decisions, especially, if there's like loss of home or possessions or medical issues involved. You've had an accident and you're emotionally in shock, and now suddenly, you're a patient in a big institution, and you're kind of trying to manage your way through that experience when you're in a weakened state. When you get to growth, nothing changes the fact of what you had to endure, but you realize that, your bones have healed, you're able to walk, your house is being rebuilt. You are able to watch the news without, wanting to throw up. People who've been through, lost someone in 9/11, they do experience anxiety every summer, because as the anniversary approaches, the media starts showing the pictures of the attack. So, the feelings that accompanied the loss will come back, but they don't debilitate you. And when you reach the point where you can say, look, that, I'm just going to turn off the TV, or I'm not going to watch it now, you end up, you can realize then that, hey, I think, I'm growing from this. I'm making better decisions for myself. I'm taking better care of myself, and those I love. And when you get to that place, then you are experiencing the gift of growth.
You yourself have been through a number of really horrific, traumatic stress situations in your career as a journalist and your career as a therapist, helping at some of the worst crises we've seen here in America. From your own perspective, how do you spend your 5 minutes a day of growth? I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, I'm the person that everybody comes to when there's a crisis to help them figure out their thoughts and whatever. But it's a hard thing to just hold your own center doing it.
Well, I would say that, while I was going through it, after Hurricane Sandy, I mean, that was very rough. It was just, and yet I knew, from running these support groups in town, that my experience was kind of no different than most people, and it was probably a little better than what a lot of people were going through, because at the time I didn't have kids living with me, so I wasn't like frantic, kind of trying to keep them in the same school and trying to do all of the legal and financial and construction supervision and all the stuff that was going on, as well as coping with the loss of a way of life that I'd had for 20 years, because I lived someplace where you didn't have to lock your door. And since the storm, you do have to lock your door. I mean, it was normal for most places in the world. People lock their doors, but it was losing that sense that it was no longer this safe, sweet little community that it had been for 20 years. So that was difficult. I spend my 5 minutes a day, kind of looking out the window wherever I am, and just enjoying. I mean, I really I love looking at the sky. I love looking at the trees. I like in my office. I like looking out the window and seeing the river, or when I'm at my desk, I can see boats going by, and so I appreciate being able to live near the water. And I appreciate being able to look at nature, and I try to do it as much as I can. But those little 5-minute windows are really very soothing for me.
On page 241 in the book, you have your 5 minutes a day to growth, and I've had this happen a lot for my listeners, so this is why I'm picking this one. This is something they have a little difficulty seeing. So you give an exercise of seeing around the corner. Mm-hmm. Can you explain how somebody can begin to do that and why it's so helpful?
Well, I'd like to go back, and I think, in the book, I probably talk a little bit about Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes.
Dr. Frankl was in several concentration camps, and I think it was when he was in Auschwitz, he saw that people were throwing themselves against the electrified fence, and people were giving up, and he had a vision of himself, a very brief, probably a few seconds of a vision where he saw himself in a lighted auditorium, and he was warm, and he was telling people about the Holocaust. And when he got that vision, he knew that he was going to survive. He was going to make it through. He was going to make it his business to make it through, so that he would be able to become that person. So I think when we talk about that ability to see around the corner, sometimes if you just close your eyes and you just ask, in your mind, what comes next, or what's coming up, or what's around the corner, or you try to make a list of 3 things that you would like to have happen in the next 6 months. I'd like to go on vacation. Things that are achievable, not I want to be a millionaire, or I want to be on America's Got Talent. These things are not what the thing that makes a problem impossible is when we frame the problem so that the outcome, the result, is in someone else's control. And I've seen this over and over and over again. The outcome, the result, has to be within your control. So make a list of 3 things that are achievable and realistic for you, reasonable for you to do in the next 6 months. I'd like to go to the movies 3 times. I want to go visit my best friend in California, and I want to go on vacation. And maybe the best friend and the vacation are the same thing, and maybe they're not. So think of 3 things that you would like to have happen, and then close your eyes and just make a little movie for yourself of what that's going to be like. And it's like creating new neuronal pathways in the brain. You create these little movies. You're kind of creating something for the brain to move towards, and we can keep reminding ourselves, those are the things that I wanted for around the corner in the next 6 months. So you start kind of planting these little seeds, and if you're not visual, think about it in terms of what do you want to be telling yourself? What do you want to be thinking? What do you want to, what it goes back to, you're making those cognitive restructuring statements. What do you want to reinforce that you believe in? That's
okay, and we have
to
go to commercial.
Okay.
Our sponsors are important to us. We'll be right back, and we'll pick that right back up with Dr. Laurie Nadel.
Okay.
So, Laurie, let's just continue the thought that you were talking about.
Oh, I was saying that, with the seeing around the corner, if you're not visual, you can create statements like, "My faith will be stronger," or "I'll spend more time with my friends." I have a New Year's resolution that I make every year. I've been making it for the last 30-something years, and it's throw out half of what you own and spend more time with your friends. And so, when the hurricane took everything, the town sewer pump broke during the storm surge. So when the tide went out, everything was contaminated with raw sewage, and all the houses on the island became toxic. And so I had to become a FEMA refugee, and I packed, what wasn't contaminated. I packed it, in a suitcase, and I went kind of roaming around the country, visiting friends, visiting relatives, eventually living in my friend's basement in Brooklyn so I could get to my office. There was no electricity in the southern half of Manhattan, or the southern third of Manhattan, from 34th Street South, and so I had to wait till the power came back on before I could go back so that I could go back to work. And so seeing around the corner is where you would say, I'm going to spend more time with my friends. I'm going to clean up what I don't need. I'm going to get rid of things that don't serve me anymore. You can make those kinds of statements as kind of power statements for a meaningful future. Another thing is you can ask yourself, looking around the corner, what can I do? What can I give? What can I bring so that my future can become more meaningful? So those are the kinds of questions that you can ask to see around the corner to make it more vivid. It's not always going to come in a visual form, and not everybody is a visual thinker.
And number one, I love the fact that you gave my listeners a whole bunch of different questions they can ask themselves to trigger a way to see around the corner, since to me, questions are the way to completely transform your thinking, increase neuroplasticity and stuff. The key I pick up on that is it has to be outcomes that are within your control. And you said that a few times. So often we do the America's Got Talent thing, but pick something that is possible for you to achieve, that you can control it. It doesn't rely on outside factors.
Right. So, if you want to, study real estate, your ultimate goal is to be a millionaire. Nothing wrong with that. How can you do that? Well, you can get a real estate license, or you can start, you can start, buying houses or properties that need to be fixed up, fix them up and then, sell them and make a profit. I mean, there are steps that you can take along the way to achieve that goal. But, I want to be a millionaire in 6 months, and without thinking about what pieces of that are potentially within your control and manageable and achievable and doable, it's not going to happen, because the money fairy. I'm sorry to tell you this, the money fairy probably doesn't know where you live. I've been asking her to show up at my place for years. If she comes to me and you send me your address, I'll be happy to ask her to go to you. But she hasn't shown up yet.
That's just so perfect.
But it's a great goal to have. It's just when you're seeing or sensing or listening your way around the corner, you want to kind of break it down into what are the steps that I could take that would be reasonable, achievable, and within my control.
When I work with
that's a great question.
When I work with my one-on-one clients, they'll often do that. I want to be a millionaire in 6 months, and I'm like, okay, that's like seeing around the corner. If the block is a million miles long, let's just see around the corner of your house first.
Right.
Like take a small see around the corner, and then maybe a lot bigger one and a bigger one.
Right. Right.
I want to jump into
stages. Yeah.
I want to jump into something else you talk about in your book. This whole concept. I really wanted to go over emotional first aid, but I think this is something good too. Questioning answers. You talk about how during stress you tend to ask questions that have yes or no, and how you can reframe it to help you de-stress or avoid.
Right.
Take us through that process briefly.
Well, yes, I think that what I found to be extremely helpful in all situations is to kind of step into the Socratic method, which is a way of asking open-ended questions. We see it in courtroom dramas, but it's actually very easy to do. So instead of saying, are you going to send me my money, or is the doctor coming to see me now? You can ask a how question. For example, how can I help you to do what you need to do so that I can get paid? Or what else do you need from me so that I can get paid? Or how else do I need to look at this situation? Where am I getting stuck? What else can I be learning? Or if you've had an accident, you're in the hospital, you say, how can I, instead of is the doctor going to call me, then how can I get the doctor to call me? So questions that ask how basically process questions that imply that there is a solution. So, when you keep hitting the wall because you're asking yes/no questions, or you're getting answers that are basically no answers, or very vague kind of for want of a better word, BS answers that are really frustrating, try rephrasing your questions into open-ended questions that are process-oriented, that use the word how or how else or why not questions. Well, why not? Or what if? What if we look at this a little differently?
Okay.
That's actually a really good, powerful engine for opening up a question.
And since
as you know very well, because you ask great questions.
Thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left to the show,
okay.
And I know people are going to want to reach out to you and find out how to get this book. So please share how people can get the book and how they can reach out to you if they need some help.
Well, thank you for asking. You kind of brought this up at the beginning. We do want to get the word out, and you can help by reading the book. It is going to be available in libraries in a few months, and it's also available on Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, and in all independent bookstores and Barnes and Noble bookstores. So when you have looked at the book, you have read the book, please spread the word. Please share it with friends and talk about it, and let people know that this book is available to help people who are recovering from catastrophic events or traumatic events of any kind. And I really, really would appreciate it. I'm very big on what I call the reach out to humans movement. So human to human interaction, I think, is what we need right now. We need to really, I think, incorporate it consciously and mindfully into our lives, because everything is so automated and digital.
So true. And
we have power.
I want to make sure people can find out how to reach out to you if they need some help.
Thank you. My website is laurienadel.com. That's LaurieNadel.com.
All right. Last thought you'd like to share?
Last thought is you. Thank you so much for listening. You are stronger than you know, and whatever it is that you may have gone through, my heart goes out to you, and the book is here to help you get through and get stronger.
Dr. Nadel, thank you so much for being on the show today. I know that you've helped a lot of my listeners just with what we talked about. Everybody, go out and grab a copy of The 5 Gifts, Discovering Hope, Healing, and Strength When Disaster Strikes by Dr. Laurie Nadel. I can tell you that it has helped me tremendously, even just dealing with the loss of my mom and a few other traumas in my life. And remember, everyone, the right questions can change your life. So what are you asking today? Take a breath. Learn the emotional tips to first aid, and remember, you're not alone.
You've been listening to It's All About the Questions, starring Laura Stewart. Connect with Laura at it'sallaboutthequestions.com and download a free workbook that will help you ask better questions starting today.